And I want to first call up the founder of this Kinnis Torah, Rabbi Hakhal from Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas.
Can you be quiet, please?
And thank you again for making sure this happens, even though you couldn't always make it begashmi. So we appreciate you keeping this going strong.
Little correction: the founder of this Kinnis Torah is the Rebbe, and we're just here to fulfill the Rebbe's Torah. So I am not here today for any big chidushim. I just want to share a nekuda that can really, hopefully, give a tremendous, deeper appreciation and maybe also understanding of the Rebbe's Miftzah Hakhal. Everybody is aware how much the Rebbe kocht the Miftzah Hakhal, and something the Rebbe started from the very, very beginning. In fact, the very first Hakhal, when the Rebbe was Chasna the Bein Asiya in Tafresh Tzadik Beis, the Frierdiker Rebbe asked the Rebbe to Farbrengen and Sukkos, and the whole Farbrengen, as we could see from the Shemis, was about Hakhal. And then throughout the years, the Rebbe would continuously koch and Hakhal until Tafshin Mem Aleph, when the Rebbe stood him in a very, very strong way, and until we reached Tafshin Mem Ches, when the Rebbe spoke about Hakhal in a very shturim dika oifen, and in a way launched Miftzah Hakhal. And one of the interesting things that I was trying to understand is that when you learn the sichos about Hakhal, especially in the Tkufa of Tishrei Tafshin Mem Ches, the Rebbe speaks about Hakhal in a very, very strong oifen, to the extent that the Rebbe uses a term that it's not enough to turn in Hakhal, it's not enough to do in Hakhal, but we actually daven in Hakhal. The Rebbe used the expression that as metuta zeifil in Hakhal, bis as mekuktefem, mizet garnished anders, chutz von dem as es geht darum Hakhal. So I was trying to understand what that means, that as mekuktefem mensch und mizet as es geht darum Hakhal. How is that practically possible for a human being to embody Hakhal, if Hakhal is something we do, not something we are? So what I'd like to share very briefly is a chiddush of the Rebbe and again to Hakhal, how I think, in my humble understanding, the Rebbe says a similar nekuda and again to Sfiras HaOmer, and by comparing and contrasting these two sichos, both Benegeh to Hakhal and Benegeh to Sfiras HaOmer, we get a deeper understanding of what Miftzah Hakhal is all about. So there's a sicha from Yud Gimel Tishrei Tafshin Mem Ches, where the Rebbe asks a very simple question: why is it that we don't find anywhere any zecher for Hakhal? Most mitzvahs that we did in the past that we don't do anymore, we have some kind of zecher for them. But there's no zecher for Hakhal. We don't see any chachamim throughout the ages establishing any kind of specific zecher for Hakhal. And the Rebbe says the question is even stronger if Hakhal comes after Shemitah. Shemitah, we actually have the mitzvah itself that we're Makayim today, whether it's the Raisa or the Rabbana, but we're actually Makayim the mitzvah. Why is it that there's no actual zecher that was Nesakin for Hakhal? And in the Sikha itself, the Rebbe doesn't answer the question, but in the Ara, the Rebbe says a very fascinating view that the Rebbe seems to be machadish on our understanding of the mitzvah of Hakhal, which gives a very different understanding about what Hakhal is all about. And in this Ara, the Rebbe says in Ara 89, and actually what I'd like to do, just because usually by Kinnis Torahs, I have a hard time following, so I'm going to put this on the screen so we could follow along. This is where the Rebbe brings this question about how come there's no zecher for Hakhal. In Ara 89, the Rebbe says that what is the essence of the mitzvah of Hakhal? The pasuk clearly tells us that the essence of the mitzvah of Hakhal is L'man Yishmu, L'man Yilmedu, that every year to strengthen his Avos Hashem and his Yiras Hashem and his Torah mitzvahs. So the Rebbe says that if the essence of the mitzvah of Hakhal is a renewed sense of commitment to the Eibishter, to Machazak Yiras Shamayim, then it's obvious that it's impossible to make a zeicha for Hakhal, because whatever zeicha we do will be the actual mitzvah itself. In the lashon of the Rebbe, I efshar lase zeicher lezeh ki eze zeicher leyiras Hashem hu a mitzvah. In other words, the whole idea of a zeicher is to do something different, something separate from the mitzvah, in order to remember the mitzvah that we once did. But if the essence of Hakhal is to be machazek ha-Torah mitzvahs, then the way we remember Hakhal is by doing exactly that, by being machazek our Avodas Hashem. So based on this, l'cheda, what I would like to propose and share is that now we can understand a little deeper what the Rebbe means when the Rebbe demands that the idea of Miftzah Hakhal is as mekuktefem mizalzen as geit harum Hakhal, because Hakhal is not a mitzvah that you do. The gather of mitzvahs Hakhal, based on this ha'ara, is not so much about the melech reading the Torah, but the gather of mitzvahs Hakhal is laman yishmu laman yilmudu. It's about not what the person does, but about the state of the person's being. So if we understand Hakhal to be the state of the person's being, then we could also understand what it means as mekukte fayid umezeta segeta rum Hakhal, because Hakhal is not about what you do. Hakhal is about who you are. And I want to hopefully help us understand this a step further by bringing a sikha from the Rebbe from Chilek Chav Beis, Parshas Emer, Sikha Aleph, which was in the project of the Sikhas a few weeks ago, where the Rebbe says an interesting gather about the mitzvah of tefillah. That by tefillah we see something which seemingly the Rebbe is saying the same idea as Hakhal, that the main gather of the mitzvah of tefillah is not the maisa of the tefillah, it's not the words the person's saying, but it's the matzav hanafshi of Adam HaMispalel. It's the fact that the person has a regesh, believe Adam, the person's feeling the closest to Hashem. That's the gather of tefillah. In other words, tefillah is not about what you do. Tefillah is about your state of being. And the Rebbe connects the same thing with Sfiras Eimer as well. In that sikha, that the definition of Sfiras Eimer is not the fact that you're actually saying the words, but it's actually the Havana and the idea what the number is for tonight. And the Rebbe is mitzayin in the sikha there in the Hara. That's why if someone is not sure what number it is, they can't say two numbers, mesafik, because he can't know two things at the same time. It doesn't make sense. So, in other words, in that Sikha Chelek Chav Beis, the Rebbe seems to be saying very clear that the gather of Tefillah and the gather of Sfiras Eimer is not so much just the Maisa, like most mitzvahs, but rather the very etzem gather of the mitzvah of Tefillah and the mitzvah of Sfiras Eimer is not what you're doing, but what you're feeling, what you know, what's the matzav hanafshi of the person. How is all this relevant? So the Rebbe says there's actually an nafka. If the mitzvah is not about the maisa, but the mitzvah is about the matzav hanafshi of the person, you could understand that the ba'ula b'nefesh adam is much greater by a mitzvah like tefillah and a mitzvah like Sfiras Eimer. Because if a person's fulfilling the mitzvah through feeling mischanan b'nafshe, or if a person's fulfilling Sfiras Eimer by having a real awareness of what number and what sfira you're at, the Rebbe says that's when you could actually be pale in a person in a much deeper way, which is why we say l'taharenu at the end of Sfiras Eimer. So the order that I'm being there is that based on the Sikha and Chilek Chav Beis, we can also much deeper understand the Rebbe's Chiddush Benegeh to Hakhal as well. Because seemingly in Hakhal, the Rebbe is saying the same idea, that it's not about what the person is doing, it's about what the person feels, what the person's matzav hanafshi. So just like by tefillah, by Sfiras Eimer, when a person's makayim the mitzvah b'shlemusa, it changes the person himself. So too, when it comes to Hakhal, when a person is experiencing Hakhal the way it's meant to be, where it's not just a zeicher, but it's actually laman yishmu laman yilmudu, then it actually changes mahusa adam. And now we can understand what the Rebbe means when the Rebbe says, as mekukte fayid mizet, as segeta rum Hakhal, because it's not about what he's doing, it's about the state of being that he's in. And I want to conclude with an interesting number of letters that I found that seemingly shows us that this idea of the Mehusa Adam is what's relevant more than the Maisa, seemingly is also connected to the mitzvah of Tefillin, because one of the many Nekudas the Rebbe brings in many letters that the Rebbe writes, Benegeh to Tefillin, is the importance of Perek Mem Aleph. And when you know Perek Mem Aleph Tanya, it has a tremendous impact on the person who puts on Tefillin. So I want to point out from the many letters that I found, one letter which really drives home this point very strongly is where the Rebbe says that if a person puts in Tefillin and he's mizbein Perek Mem Aleph Tanya, and it's an eifin of yuchkuku advarim b'meyach zichreinai, that it becomes part of him, not just something he's doing, but something he's feeling, then the Rebbe says something incredible, which really is the same idea of Hakhal, that it could actually be poil not only on him, Beruchnius, not only on the others around him, but it could also be poil on Brias Haguf. So the extent of the Pu'ula B'nefesh Adam is that a person could possibly become gesund if he's Makayim the mitzvah in the proper way. And I'll conclude with a story which the Rebbe said a few times, a very Geshmaka Maisa, which I think drives the point home very clear. The story about the Alter Rebbe, that when the Alter Rebbe was taken to prison and he touched his tefillin, and everyone present became very afraid. The Alter Rebbe said that this is relevant to V'ro Kalami Aretz Ki Shem Hashem Nikro Alecha Elu Tefillin Shebereish. So because they saw the tefillin, they got afraid. So one of the Chassidim asked, how come it doesn't happen to us? So the Alter Rebbe said, because it says in the Gemara, tefillin sheberosh, not tefillin sha'al harosh. So if you put on tefillin and ephim that it's a maisa that you do, then it's tefillin al harosh. But if you put on tefillin and ephim that it's who you are and it's chakuk b'meichai, then it's not something you're doing, it's a state of being. So to be mesakim, l'cheda, when the Rebbe demands of us to experience mivtza hakel in a way as mizet ayid, mizet hakel, this means that hakel, the geder of hakel, similar to the geder of tefillah, the geder of Sfiras Eimer, is that it's not what you do, it's about where you are and what's your state of being. And then as the Rebbe concludes on that sicha, if we do it like that, and just like the Yidden in Russia were continuously in a tnuah of tefillin shebereish, will also be zeichet to continuously be in such a matziv that we're not just doing hakel, but we're breathing hakel.